I was hunched over my laptop at 2 a.m. in my childhood bedroom, the same room where I dreamed of building something that mattered. The glow from the screen illuminated stacks of business plans, prototype sketches, and rejection letters that had become my constant companions over the past 18 months. My sustainable jewelry business, Verde Luxe, was my everything. Handcrafted pieces made from recycled ocean plastic and ethically sourced metals. But to my family, it was just another one of Maya's silly phases. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The notification ping made my heart skip. An email from Harrison & Associates, one of the biggest luxury retail chains on the West Coast. I'd sent them my proposal 3 weeks ago, knowing it was a long shot but believing in my vision. My hands trembled as I opened it. "We are impressed with your innovative approach and would like to schedule a meeting to discuss a potential partnership. Please call us at your earliest convenience." I had to read it twice before the words sank in. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I smiled. Really smiled. This was it. This was the validation I'd been working toward. The proof that Verde Luxe wasn't just a pipe dream born from my environmental science degree and too many late nights watching Shark Tank. I practically floated down the stairs the next morning, clutching my phone with the email pulled up, ready to share the news with my family over breakfast. The kitchen smelled like coffee, and my mother's famous blueberry pancakes, the same ones she'd made every Sunday since I was 7. My parents sat at the worn oak table, my father buried in his newspaper while my mother scrolled through her tablet, probably checking the church newsletter for the 3rd time. My younger brother Jake was there too, visiting from his job at the bank downtown. He'd always been the golden child, the one who'd followed the prescribed path of college, internship, corporate job, and steady paycheck. Everything I'd apparently failed to do by choosing entrepreneurship over security. "I have incredible news," I announced, unable to contain my excitement any longer. "Harrison & Associates wants to meet with me about Verde Luxe. They're interested in carrying my jewelry line in their stores." The reaction wasn't what I'd expected. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. My mother glanced at me with that patient expression she reserved for my more unrealistic pronouncements, like the time I'd insisted I could train our golden retriever to fetch the mail. "That's nice, honey," she said in the tone people use when humoring a child. "But, maybe it's time to start thinking about something more stable." Mrs. Henderson mentioned that the insurance company downtown is hiring. Good benefits, steady hours. My stomach dropped. "Mom, this is exactly what I've been working toward. Harrison & Associates has over 200 stores. This could change everything." Jake finally spoke up, not bothering to hide his smirk. "Maya, come on. How many times have you gotten excited about some business thing that went nowhere? Remember the organic soap phase, the upcycled furniture thing? You spent 6 months on that photography business that made, what, $50? The words stung because there was a grain of truth in them. I had started other ventures that hadn't panned out. But this was different. Verde Luxe wasn't a hobby or a phase. I'd spent over a year perfecting the designs, sourcing materials, building an online presence. I had real customers, real sales, real momentum. "This isn't like those other things," I insisted, my voice tighter than I intended. "I've already sold over 300 pieces online. My Instagram has 15,000 followers. People are responding to the environmental message." My father finally folded his newspaper and looked at me with the expression of someone delivering unwelcome but necessary truth. "Maya, sweetheart, playing around with jewelry on the internet isn't a real business. You're 26 years old. Your college friends are buying houses, getting promoted, starting families. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. When are you going to accept that this crafting hobby needs to take a back seat to adult responsibilities?" The word hobby hit me like a physical blow. I'd poured my heart, my savings, my entire identity into Verde Luxe. I'd taught myself metalworking techniques, studied supply chain sustainability, learned digital marketing from scratch. I'd worked 16-hour days, sacrificed my social life, and lived on ramen noodles to fund my inventory. This wasn't a hobby. This was my calling. "It's not a hobby, Dad. It's a business." And Harrison and Associates wouldn't be interested if it wasn't legitimate. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand with the kind of condescending gentleness that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Maya, these big companies probably send out hundreds of those emails. They're just fishing for people to pay them fees or something. You can't seriously think a major retailer would want your little jewelry project." The dismissal in her voice was devastating, but it was Jake's reaction that really cut deep. He actually laughed. Not a cruel laugh, exactly, but the kind of incredulous chuckle you'd give someone who insisted they were going to win the lottery. "Maya, I love you, but you've got to be realistic here. Big retail chains don't just randomly partner with someone selling jewelry out of their childhood bedroom. They have entire teams of buyers, market research, established brands with proven track records. What makes you think they'd choose someone with no business experience over companies that have been in the industry for decades?" I felt heat rising in my cheeks. Because my designs are unique. Because sustainability is trending. Because I've built something people actually want. "Want enough to buy occasionally from your website, maybe?" Jake continued, his tone now taking on the patient condescension of someone explaining basic math to a kindergartner. "But want enough to justify shelf space in premium retail locations? Come on, Maya, be serious." The conversation devolved from there. Every achievement I mentioned was minimized. Every milestone dismissed as luck or delusion. When I pulled up my sales figures, my father suggested I was probably miscounting or including returns. When I showed them customer reviews, my mother wondered aloud if I'd asked friends to write them. When I tried to explain my 5-year business plan, Jake questioned whether I even understood basic economics. By the time breakfast was over, I felt like I'd been systematically dismantled. Not just my business, but my judgment, my competence, my very grasp on reality. I retreated to my room, the Harrison and Associates email still glowing on my phone screen, and for the first time in months, I questioned everything. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was delusional. Maybe the email was a mistake or a scam. Maybe Verde Luxe really was just an expensive hobby that I'd convinced myself was more than it actually was. I spent the rest of the day in a fog of self-doubt, their words echoing in my head like a broken record. Pathetic. Jake hadn't used that exact word, but it hung in the air anyway. That's what they thought of my life's work. Pathetic. But as the sun set over the small Colorado town where I'd grown up, where everyone knew everyone and dreams were supposed to be practical rather than passionate, I made a decision. I was going to call Harrison and Associates. Not because I was sure they were legitimate, but because I needed to know. I needed to prove to myself, one way or another, whether my family's crushing assessment was accurate, or whether they were the ones who couldn't see what was right in front of them. The conversation with their buyer, scheduled for the following Tuesday, would either validate everything I'd worked for or confirm my family's worst assumptions about my judgment. Either way, I'd finally have an answer to the question that had been haunting me since that morning. Was I a delusional dreamer wasting everyone's time? Or was I an entrepreneur whose own family simply couldn't recognize her potential? Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made me feel optimistic about new beginnings. Instead, I woke up with my stomach in knots, the weight of my family's words from Sunday still pressing down on my chest like a stone. I'd barely slept, alternating between rehearsing what I'd say to Harrison and Associates and imagining all the ways this could go wrong. I'd scheduled the call for 10 a.m., giving myself enough time to set up in the local coffee shop downtown where the Wi-Fi was reliable and the background noise might mask any nervousness in my voice. The familiar ritual of ordering my usual vanilla latte and claiming the corner table by the window felt like putting on armor. This was my space, my routine, away from the suffocating doubt that seemed to permeate every corner of my childhood home. My laptop screen displayed 3 browser tabs: my Verde Luxe website, my carefully crafted pitch deck, and the Harrison and Associates corporate page that I'd studied until I could recite their mission statement from memory. Their focus on emerging designers and sustainable luxury aligned perfectly with everything I'd built Verde Luxe to represent. This wasn't some random email blast, despite what my mother had suggested. They'd found me, researched me, chosen me. At exactly 10 a.m., I dialed the number from their email signature. The phone rang twice before a warm, professional voice answered. "Harrison and Associates, this is Jennifer Martinez, senior buyer for accessories and fine jewelry." "Hi Jennifer, this is Maya Chen." I'm calling about the email regarding Verde Luxe. Thank you so much for reaching out. Maya, I'm so glad you called. I've been following your work online for the past few months, and I have to say, what you're doing with sustainable jewelry is exactly what our customers are asking for. The craftsmanship in your pieces is exceptional, and your story about ocean plastic really resonates with our brand values. I felt a surge of vindication so strong it almost knocked me over. She'd been following my work for months. This wasn't a mass email or a fishing expedition. This was real recognition from someone whose entire job was identifying promising talent in the jewelry industry. I appreciate that so much, I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. Verde Luxe has been my passion project for over a year now, and hearing that it connects with what Harrison and Associates represents means everything to me. I'd like to set up an in-person meeting if possible. We're always looking for unique pieces that tell a story, and your environmental focus is particularly compelling right now. Our customers are increasingly conscious about the impact of their purchases, and we've seen a 40% increase in demand for sustainable luxury goods over the past 18 months. My hand was shaking as I wrote down the details. They wanted to meet at their Portland headquarters next Thursday. They were prepared to discuss everything from product placement to marketing support to potential expansion into their flagship stores. Jennifer mentioned numbers that made my head spin, talking about initial orders in the thousands of units rather than the dozens I was used to fulfilling from my bedroom workshop. One thing I should mention, Jennifer continued, is that we've had our eye on the sustainable jewelry space for a while now. We've looked at several established brands, but frankly, most of them have lost that authentic, artisanal quality that makes pieces special. Your work has something they don't, a genuine connection to the environmental mission that goes beyond marketing speak. After we hung up, I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, staring at the notes I'd scribbled during our conversation. Initial orders of 2,000 pieces, placement in 50 stores to start, with potential expansion to their full network of over 200 locations. Marketing support including professional photography and inclusion in their sustainability campaign. Revenue projections that would transform Verde Luxe from a side hustle into a legitimate, thriving business. But more than the numbers, it was Jennifer's tone that stuck with me. She'd spoken to me like a peer, like someone whose opinion mattered in the industry. She'd asked for my input on seasonal trends, wanted to know my thoughts on expanding the product line, treated my environmental expertise as valuable rather than naive idealism. I drove home in a daze, my mind already racing with everything I'd need to prepare for the Portland meeting. Updated portfolio materials, refined pricing strategies, production timelines that could scale up to meet their potential orders. For the first time in months, I felt like I could see a clear path forward, not just for Verde Luxe, but for my entire future. The house was quiet when I walked in, my parents both at work and Jake back at his apartment downtown. I headed straight to my room and began pulling together everything I'd need for what could be the most important meeting of my life. But as I worked, my family's words from Sunday kept creeping back in. The dismissive laughter, the condescending pat on the hand, the casual devastation of being told my life's work was essentially worthless. I found myself second-guessing every decision. Was my pricing competitive enough for a major retailer? Did I have sufficient inventory management systems in place? Could I actually deliver on the scale they were talking about? The confident woman who'd just spoken with Jennifer Martinez began to feel like an imposter who'd somehow fooled a major corporation into taking her seriously. That evening at dinner, I decided to share the news. Maybe seeing my family's reaction to real, concrete progress would help silence the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my brother's skeptical laughter. I had my call with Harrison and Associates today, I announced as my mother served her famous pot roast, the same recipe that had graced our dinner table every Tuesday for as long as I could remember. My father looked up from his plate with mild interest. Oh right, that jewelry thing. How did that go? They want to meet in person next week. In Portland. They're talking about carrying Verde Luxe in 50 stores initially, with the potential to expand to their full network. The buyer has been following my work for months. The silence that followed felt heavier than enthusiasm. My mother continued cutting her vegetables with mechanical precision, while Jake, who'd joined us for dinner, raised an eyebrow in what I could only describe as polite skepticism. That's wonderful, honey. My mother finally said in the same tone she'd used when I'd announced I was majoring in environmental science instead of something practical like business or education. Just remember that these companies often make big promises to get you excited. Don't get your hopes up too high. Jake set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. Maya, I don't want to rain on your parade, but you need to be careful here. These retail partnerships can be really exploitative. They'll want massive inventory commitments, extended payment terms, and they'll drop you the moment something more profitable comes along. Have you thought about the logistics of scaling up production? Do you have the capital to fulfill orders in the thousands? The questions hit me like cold water. Of course I've thought about scaling up, but Jake was right that I hadn't worked out all the financial details. My current setup could handle maybe 100 pieces per month working around the clock. To fulfill orders in the thousands, I'd need equipment, workspace, potentially employees. The startup costs alone could be overwhelming. I'm still working out those details, I admitted, but Jennifer seemed to think their marketing support could help with the financial aspects. They have programs for emerging designers. My father cleared his throat, the way he did when he was about to deliver what he considered sage advice. Maya, sweetheart, you have to understand that these big corporations are looking out for their own interests, not yours. They'll promise you the world to get you to sign on the dotted line, but when push comes to shove, you'll be the one taking all the risk. What happens if you invest everything in ramping up production, and then they decide to go with someone else? The weight of their concerns settled on my shoulders like a familiar burden. Every point they raised was valid. Every question they asked exposed a gap in my preparation. But underneath their practical objections, I heard the same fundamental message that had been haunting me since Sunday. You're not capable of handling something this big. Maybe I should call Jennifer back and ask more questions about their support programs. I said, my initial excitement now tempered by a growing list of worries. Or maybe, Jake suggested gently, you should think about whether this is really the right opportunity for you. There's no shame in recognizing that you might not be ready for something this scale. You could keep Verde Luxe as a side project and still look into those insurance job openings Mom mentioned. The suggestion felt like a punch to the gut, but I forced myself to consider it objectively. Was I being reckless? Was my excitement clouding my judgment about the very real challenges of scaling a business? Jennifer Martinez was a professional with years of experience in retail buying. If she was interested in Verde Luxe, it had to be because she saw genuine potential. But my family knew me better than anyone. They'd watched me start and abandon projects before. Maybe their skepticism was protective rather than dismissive. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, my laptop open beside me displaying email after email from satisfied Verde Luxe customers. Reviews that praised not just the jewelry itself but the story behind it, the environmental mission, the quality of craftsmanship. People from as far away as Seattle and Miami had found my website and chosen to support what I was building. But customer enthusiasm was different from business readiness. Individual sales to people who discovered me through Instagram were manageable. Fulfilling orders for a major retail chain was an entirely different challenge, one that required infrastructure, capital, and expertise that I wasn't sure I possessed. I opened a new browser tab and began researching everything Jake had mentioned. Retail partnerships gone wrong, small businesses crushed by demands they couldn't meet, entrepreneurs who'd lost everything chasing opportunities that seemed too good to be true. The internet was full of cautionary tales about naive business owners who'd bitten off more than they could chew. By 3 a.m., I'd compiled a list of questions that made my initial excitement seem dangerously naive. Production capacity, quality control systems, inventory management, shipping logistics, return policies, marketing co-op requirements. The complexity was overwhelming, and for the first time since receiving Jennifer's email, I began to wonder if my family might be right. But then I remembered something Jennifer had said during our call, something I'd almost forgotten in the chaos of my family's concerns. We've looked at several established brands, but most of them have lost that authentic artisanal quality that makes pieces special. She wasn't just buying products, she was buying into a vision, a story, a mission that resonated with Harrison and Associates, customers. I pulled up my business plan, the one I'd spent months refining, and began cross-referencing it with everything I'd researched about retail partnerships. The framework was there. The vision was clear. What I lacked was confidence in my ability to execute at scale, and that doubt was being amplified by every well-meaning concern my family raised. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of continuing to spiral through worst-case scenarios, I called my college roommate Sarah, who'd gone on to work in business development for a major outdoor gear company. If anyone could give me objective advice about retail partnerships, it would be someone who dealt with them professionally. Maya, I haven't heard from you in forever. How's the jewelry business going? The fact that she remembered and asked about Verde Luxe as a legitimate business rather than a hobby was more encouraging than I'd expected. I filled her in on the Harrison and Associates opportunity and the concerns my family had raised. Sarah listened without interruption, then asked a series of pointed questions about my production capacity, financial position, and long-term goals. Unlike my family's questions, which felt designed to highlight problems, Sarah's felt designed to identify solutions. Okay, here's the thing, she said after I'd answered everything. Your family isn't wrong about the challenges, but they're thinking about this backwards. They're focused on all the reasons you might fail, instead of all the reasons you might succeed. And honestly, what they're describing sounds like pretty standard retail partnership concerns that every small business faces when scaling up. So you think I should go to the Portland meeting? Maya, I think you'd be crazy not to. Harrison and Associates has a solid reputation in the industry. If their buyer has been following your work for months, that means they've done their homework. They're not going to waste time on someone they don't think can deliver. Sarah went on to explain that most retail partnerships started small precisely to test whether a supplier could handle larger volumes. The initial 50-store placement wasn't a make-or-break commitment. It was a trial run that could prove Verde Luxe's viability at scale. Besides, she added, you can negotiate terms that protect you. Payment schedules, production timelines, marketing support, even exit clauses if things don't work out. This isn't an all-or-nothing gamble. It's a business opportunity that comes with manageable risks if you approach it strategically. After we hung up, I felt like I could breathe again. Sarah's perspective reminded me that challenges weren't the same as deal breakers, and that every successful business had faced similar scaling decisions at some point. The difference between entrepreneurs who succeeded and those who didn't wasn't the absence of obstacles, but the willingness to solve problems rather than be paralyzed by them. I spent the rest of the week preparing for Portland with a focus I hadn't felt since starting Verde Luxe. Instead of worrying about everything that could go wrong, I researched solutions for everything that would need to go right. Equipment suppliers who specialized in small jewelry businesses, fulfillment services that could handle increased shipping volume, online courses in retail mathematics and inventory management. By the time Thursday arrived, I had a comprehensive presentation that addressed every concern Jennifer might raise about Verde Luxe's ability to scale. More importantly, I had a clear vision of what success would look like and a realistic timeline for achieving it. The Harrison and Associates building in Portland was everything I'd imagined a major retail headquarters would be. Glass and steel rising into the cloudy Oregon sky, lobby filled with natural light and displays showcasing their featured designers. Walking through those doors felt like stepping into the future I'd been working towards since the day I'd made my first piece of recycled jewelry. Jennifer Martinez was exactly as warm and professional in person as she'd been on the phone. Tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confident energy that came from years of successful deal-making. She led me through their showroom, pointing out pieces from other emerging designers they'd partnered with, explaining their customer demographics and buying patterns. The sustainability angle is huge for us right now, she said as we settled into a conference room overlooking the city. Our customers are willing to pay premium prices for products that align with their values, but they still expect luxury, quality, and design. From what I've seen of your work, Verde Luxe hits that sweet spot perfectly. The meeting lasted 3 hours. We discussed everything from production timelines to pricing strategies to marketing campaigns. Jennifer asked detailed questions about my supply chain, my design process, my long-term vision for the brand. Every question felt like validation that Verde Luxe was being taken seriously as a business, not dismissed as a hobby. By the end of our conversation, we'd outlined a partnership agreement that was everything I'd hoped for and more. Placement in 60 stores to start, with expansion possible based on sales performance. Marketing support including professional photography and inclusion in their spring sustainability campaign. Most importantly, payment terms and production schedules that were ambitious but achievable. "I'm going to be honest with you, Maya," Jennifer said as we shook hands. "We see a lot of potential partnerships that look good on paper but fall apart when it comes to execution. What impressed me about Verde Luxe isn't just the product, it's the thought you've put into the business side. Your preparation for this meeting was exceptional. Walking out of that building, I felt like a different person than the one who'd driven up from Colorado that morning. Not just because of the partnership opportunity, though that was life-changing enough, but because someone whose job was evaluating business potential had looked at Verde Luxe and seen exactly what I'd been trying to build from the beginning. The drive home gave me 6 hours to process everything that had happened and prepare for what came next. I knew my family would have questions, concerns, probably renewed attempts to talk me out of taking risks. But I also knew something now that I hadn't known a week ago. Verde Luxe wasn't just viable, it was valuable. Valuable enough that a major retail chain wanted to bet their reputation on its success. More than that, I'd proven to myself that I could handle high-stakes business conversations with confidence and competence. The woman who'd spent Sunday morning doubting her own judgment had just negotiated a deal that would transform her hobby into a legitimate career. The real test would come when I shared this news with my family. Not just the opportunity itself, but my decision to pursue it despite every concern they'd raised. For the first time in my life, I was about to choose my own vision over their protective skepticism. The question was whether they'd be proud of my success or frustrated by my refusal to heed their warnings. Either way, Verde Luxe was about to get the chance it deserved, and I was about to discover just how much I was capable of achieving when I trusted my own instincts over other people's fears. The drive home from Portland should have been a victory lap, but instead I found myself rehearsing conversations I didn't want to have. My phone had been buzzing with texts from my mother asking how the meeting went, each message escalating in urgency. "Hope everything went well, honey." Followed an hour later by, "Haven't heard from you, getting worried," and finally, "Call me as soon as you get this." I knew what she was really asking. She wanted confirmation that the meeting had gone poorly, that the opportunity was as unrealistic as she'd predicted, that I'd finally learned my lesson about chasing impossible dreams. The thought of disappointing her with actual success felt more daunting than the business challenges I'd just spent 3 hours navigating with Jennifer Martinez. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the house was lit up like Christmas morning. Every window glowed with warm yellow light, and I could see shapes moving around in the kitchen through the sheer curtains. They were all there, waiting for my report like concerned relatives gathered around a hospital bed. I sat in my car for a moment, engine off, staring at the house where I'd grown up, believing that safety was more important than ambition, that steady paychecks were more valuable than personal fulfillment. The contract terms Jennifer and I had discussed felt surreal in this setting, like a story I'd heard about someone else's life rather than an opportunity that was actually mine to accept or decline. The front door opened before I'd even reached the porch steps. My mother appeared in the doorway, her face a careful mask of supportive concern that I'd learned to read like a weather forecast. She was braced for bad news, prepared to comfort me through another entrepreneurial disappointment. "Maya, we've been so worried. How did it go?" Come in, your father made coffee." The living room felt smaller than usual, crowded with the weight of their expectations. Jake was perched on the edge of the couch, still wearing his work clothes from the bank, having clearly rushed over after receiving whatever updates my mother had been texting throughout the day. My father stood by the fireplace, hands in his pockets, wearing the expression of someone prepared to deliver gentle but firm guidance about accepting reality. "So," my mother said, settling into her favorite armchair and folding her hands in her lap. "Tell us everything. What did they really want?" The phrasing stung. Not, "How did it go?" or "What did you learn?" but "What did they really want?" As if the partnership offer had been some kind of elaborate deception designed to exploit my naivete. "It went really well." I began, pulling out my phone to reference the notes I'd taken during the meeting. Jennifer Martinez, their senior buyer, wants to place Verde Luxe pieces in 60 stores initially, with the possibility of expanding to their full network based on sales performance. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear them processing this information, searching for the catch that would explain why a major retail chain would want to partner with their daughter's bedroom jewelry business. Jake was the first to speak, his voice carefully neutral. 60 stores? Maya, that's a massive commitment. What kind of inventory requirements are we talking about? I'd anticipated this question and had my answer ready. Initial orders would be around 3,000 pieces across all 60 locations. They're giving me 4 months to ramp up production, and they're offering payment terms that would cover my upfront costs. My father cleared his throat, the way he did when he was about to ask the question he believed would expose the fundamental flaw in whatever scheme I'd gotten myself mixed up in. What's their cut? How much are they expecting you to pay them for this placement? They don't charge placement fees, I explained. They take a standard retail markup, but that's built into the wholesale pricing structure we discussed. It's actually pretty favorable compared to what I researched about other retail partnerships. My mother leaned forward, her reporter instincts kicking in despite herself. She'd worked for the local newspaper for 15 years before switching to freelance work, and she knew how to spot holes in a story. Maya, honey, this sounds almost too good to be true. Major retailers don't just hand out opportunities like this. What aren't you telling us? The accusation hit me like a slap. Not only did they not believe the opportunity was real, they thought I was lying about the details. That I was either too stupid to understand what had actually been offered, or too dishonest to admit that the meeting hadn't gone as well as I was claiming. I'm not hiding anything, I said, working to keep my voice level. Jennifer Martinez has been following Verde Luxe for months. She specifically mentioned that they've been looking for sustainable jewelry lines that align with their customers' values. This isn't some random opportunity that fell out of the sky. Jake pulled out his phone and started typing. What's her full name again? And the company? I want to look this up. The fact that my own brother felt the need to fact-check my story in real time was humiliating beyond words. But I gave him the information, knowing that everything I'd told them was completely accurate and easily verifiable. Here, Jake said after a few minutes of scrolling. Jennifer Martinez, senior buyer, Harrison and Associates. She's been with the company for 8 years, previously worked at Nordstrom. Okay, so she's real. The relief in his voice that my meeting hadn't been with a complete fraud was almost more insulting than if he'd found evidence that I'd been scammed. The bar for their confidence in my judgment was apparently somewhere around, quote, capable of identifying actual human beings. Of course she's real, I snapped, my composure finally cracking. Did you seriously think I made up an entire retail chain and fabricated a 3-hour business meeting? My mother held up her hands in a gesture of peace. We're not questioning your honesty, sweetheart. We're just trying to understand how this all works. These big companies have teams of lawyers and contracts that can be very complicated. We want to make sure you're not getting in over your head. But they were questioning my honesty, or at least my competence. Every question they asked carried the implication that I was either too naive to understand what was actually happening, or too inexperienced to navigate it successfully. The possibility that I might have genuinely impressed a senior buyer at a major retail chain with my business acumen wasn't even being considered. Maybe you should have a lawyer look at whatever they want you to sign, my father suggested. These retail contracts can be very one-sided. They might be expecting you to take on liability that could wipe you out if something goes wrong. Or what about insurance? Jake added, warming to the theme. If you're producing thousands of pieces, what happens if there's a defect? What if someone has an allergic reaction to the materials? Have you thought about product liability? Each practical concern they raised was valid, and under different circumstances I would have appreciated their diligence. But the tone of the conversation made it clear that they weren't trying to help me succeed. They were trying to protect me from failure by convincing me not to try. I've thought about all of these things, I said, pulling up the business plan I'd refined over the past week. I've researched product liability insurance, identified potential manufacturing partners who can help me scale up, and worked out financial projections for different sales scenarios. This isn't some impulsive decision. My mother glanced at the documents on my phone screen with the same expression she might give a child's crayon drawing that had been proudly presented as a masterpiece. That's very thorough, honey. But creating spreadsheets is different from actually running a business at this scale. Are you sure you wouldn't be happier keeping Verde Luxe as a side project while you explore more stable career options? The suggestion felt like a knife to the chest. After everything that had happened in Portland, after 3 hours of being treated like a serious business owner by one of the most respected buyers in the industry, my own mother was still suggesting that I abandon my dreams in favor of a steady paycheck. Mom, this is my career. Verde Luxe isn't a hobby or a side project. It's a legitimate business that's about to partner with a major retail chain. Why can't you see that as good news? Because we love you, my father said, his voice heavy with the weight of parental responsibility. And we've watched you pour your heart into projects before, only to see them fall apart. We don't want to see you get hurt again. The reference to my previous ventures felt like a deliberate attempt to undermine my confidence. Yes, I'd started other businesses that hadn't succeeded. Yes, I'd been disappointed before, but I'd also learned from those experiences, and Verde Luxe was built on that foundation of hard-won knowledge. Those other projects were learning experiences, I said. They taught me what I needed to know to make Verde Luxe successful. Jennifer Martinez didn't offer me this partnership because she felt sorry for me. She offered it because Verde Luxe is a valuable brand that her customers want. Jake looked up from his phone, where he'd apparently been researching Harrison and Associates' recent partnerships. I'm seeing some mixed reviews here from other small businesses they've worked with. A few complaints about changed terms, delayed payments, dropped product lines. Are you sure you want to get involved with a company that has a track record of burning their partners? The cherry-picked negative reviews felt like a deliberate attempt to sabotage my excitement. Of course, there were dissatisfied partners. No major retailer had a perfect track record with every vendor, but Jake had clearly gone looking for problems rather than trying to understand the overall picture. Every major retailer has some unhappy partners, I replied. That's why I spent time researching their standard contract terms and negotiating protections for Verde Luxe. Jennifer was completely transparent about their expectations and requirements. But Maya, my mother interrupted, you don't have experience negotiating with people like this. They're professionals who do this for a living. How do you know you didn't agree to something that will hurt you later? The implication that I was too inexperienced to hold my own in a business conversation was the final straw. I'd spent 3 hours in that conference room discussing complex logistics, pricing strategies, and marketing campaigns with someone who treated me as an equal. I'd asked intelligent questions, provided detailed answers, and demonstrated exactly the kind of business competence that my family seemed convinced I didn't possess. Because I'm not an idiot, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Because I've spent the last year learning everything I could about this industry. Because I prepared for that meeting like my life depended on it, and I held my own with one of the most respected buyers in retail. The room fell silent. My outburst had clearly crossed some invisible line from respectful family discussion into territory they weren't prepared to navigate. My mother's face shifted into the expression she wore when she was trying to de-escalate what she perceived as an emotional overreaction. We know you're not an idiot, sweetheart. We're just worried that your enthusiasm might be clouding your judgment. This all sounds very exciting, but it also sounds very risky. Everything worthwhile is risky, I shot back. Starting a business is risky. Building something from scratch is risky, but so is spending your entire life playing it safe and wondering what might have been possible if you'd had the courage to try. My father's expression darkened. He'd spent 30 years in middle management at the phone company, climbing slowly and steadily up a ladder that promised security in exchange for ambition. The suggestion that his choices had been cowardly rather than practical clearly struck a nerve. There's nothing wrong with building a stable life, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Not everyone can afford to gamble their future on get-rich-quick schemes. This isn't a get-rich-quick scheme, I exploded, finally losing the battle to keep my composure. This is the result of 18 months of hard work, market research, product development, and business planning. Just because you don't understand what I've built doesn't mean it's not real. The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. I'd never spoken to my father that way before, never questioned his understanding or challenged his authority so directly. But I was tired of defending my competence to people who seemed determined to see failure where others saw potential. Jake tried to play mediator, his voice carefully measured. I think we all want the same thing here. We want Maya to be successful and happy. Maybe we can find a middle ground. What if you negotiated a smaller trial run with Harrison and Associates? Test the waters before committing to something this big. The suggestion revealed just how little he understood about retail partnerships. Jennifer Martinez hadn't offered me a middle ground. She'd offered me an opportunity to prove that Verde Luxe belonged in their stores. Trying to negotiate that down to something smaller would signal that I didn't believe in my own product's potential. The trial run is the 60 stores, I explained. That's how retail partnerships work. They start with a manageable test to see if the product resonates with customers. If Verde Luxe performs well, they'll expand the placement. If it doesn't, they'll phase it out. That's the risk they're taking on me. My mother shook her head, her patience clearly wearing thin. Maya, you're talking about this like it's already decided. You haven't even seen a contract yet. What if their terms are unreasonable? What if they're expecting investments you can't afford? Then I'll negotiate or walk away, I said. But I'm not going to sabotage this opportunity because you're afraid it might not work out perfectly. The accusation of sabotage was harsh, but it felt accurate. Every concern they raised, every risk they highlighted, every question they asked, seemed designed to chip away at my confidence rather than help me succeed. They weren't trying to protect me from making a mistake, they were trying to protect themselves from watching me fail. We're not trying to sabotage anything, my father said, his voice heavy with hurt. We're trying to save you from making a decision you'll regret. We've seen what happens when you get excited about something and ignore the practical considerations. What practical considerations am I ignoring? I demanded. I've researched production scaling, negotiated favorable payment terms, identified potential challenges and solutions. What exactly do you think I'm missing? Experience, Jake said quietly. Maya, you've never managed a business at this scale. You've never dealt with major retail buyers, supply chain logistics, or inventory management systems. You're talking about going from selling a few dozen pieces a month to fulfilling orders in the thousands. That's not just scaling up, that's running a completely different kind of business. His words hit home because they contained a grain of truth I'd been trying not to acknowledge. Verde Luxe's current operations were manageable because they were small. I could handle every aspect personally, from design to production to shipping to customer service. Scaling up to retail partnership levels would require systems, processes, and expertise that I'd never had to develop. But acknowledging that challenge was different from being paralyzed by it. Every successful business had faced similar scaling decisions, and the entrepreneurs who succeeded were the ones who figured out solutions rather than being defeated by obstacles. You're right that I haven't done this before, I admitted, but neither had any successful entrepreneur before their first major breakthrough. Jennifer Martinez wouldn't have offered me this partnership if she didn't believe Verde Luxe could handle it. Or maybe she's just good at her job, which includes convincing small business owners to take on more risk than they can handle, my mother suggested. These retail buyers are salespeople too, Maya. They're trained to make opportunities sound irresistible. The cynicism in her voice was crushing. She couldn't conceive of a world where Verde Luxe might actually be valuable enough to attract legitimate interest from a major retailer. In her mind, the only explanation for this opportunity was that I was being manipulated by someone more sophisticated than I was. So in your opinion, I said, working to keep my voice steady, there's no scenario where Verde Luxe might actually deserve this partnership? No possibility that I've built something genuinely worthwhile? The question hung in the air like a challenge none of them wanted to accept. Because saying yes would mean acknowledging that their protective skepticism might have been wrong, that their daughter might be more capable than they'd given her credit for. Of course Verde Luxe is worthwhile, my mother said finally. It's beautiful jewelry with a meaningful message. But worthwhile as a hobby and worthwhile as a major business venture are two very different things. And there it was. After everything I'd accomplished, after a year and a half of building something from nothing, after impressing one of the most respected buyers in the industry, my own family still saw Verde Luxe as a hobby that had gotten out of hand. "I need some air," I said, standing up abruptly. "This conversation is going in circles." "Maya, wait!" my father called after me. "We're not finished talking about this." But I was finished. I was finished defending my competence to people who seemed determined not to see it. I was finished justifying my dreams to family members who preferred their own fears to my possibilities. Most of all, I was finished allowing their doubt to contaminate my excitement about the biggest opportunity of my professional life. I walked out onto the back porch where I'd spent countless summer evenings as a child, dreaming about what my life might become. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now living one of those dreams, only to find that the people who'd raised me couldn't recognize it as anything more than an expensive mistake waiting to happen. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Martinez. "Great meeting today, Maya. I'll have the preliminary contract terms to you by Monday. Looking forward to making this partnership official." The message felt like a lifeline, a reminder that somewhere beyond this suffocating cocoon of protective pessimism, there were people who believed in what I was building. People who saw Verde Luxe's potential rather than its risks, who treated me like a business owner rather than a naive dreamer. I typed back, "Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm excited to review the terms and move forward." As I hit send, I realized I'd just made my choice, not just about the Harrison and Associates partnership, but about whose opinion mattered more, my family's fears or my own conviction. For the first time in my life, I was choosing to trust my own judgment over their protective instincts. The question now was whether they'd eventually come to see my success, or whether this would be the beginning of a fundamental shift in our relationship. Either way, Verde Luxe was about to get the chance it deserved, and I was about to discover what I was truly capable of when I stopped asking for permission to pursue my dreams. The contract arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt heavy with possibility and dread in equal measure. I'd been checking my email obsessively since Monday, refreshing my inbox every few minutes like someone waiting for medical test results. When Jennifer's message finally appeared with the subject line, "Verde Luxe Partnership Agreement Review and Discussion," my hands actually trembled as I opened the attachment. 47 pages of legal language that would transform my bedroom jewelry business into something I'd only dreamed about. The numbers were even better than what we'd discussed in Portland. Initial order quantities, payment schedules, marketing support allocations, expansion timelines. Everything laid out in precise legal terminology that made it feel more real than any conversation could have. But as I scrolled through the dense paragraphs of contract language, my family's warnings echoed in my head like a persistent headache. Product liability clauses, inventory requirements, quality control standards, termination conditions. Each section revealed new layers of complexity that I'd never had to navigate before. The gap between my current operations and what this partnership would require felt like staring across the Grand Canyon. I printed the entire document and spread it across my desk, highlighting sections that seemed particularly important or confusing. By the time I finished my initial review, half the contract was glowing in yellow highlighter, and I had 3 pages of questions that ranged from basic clarification to concerns about whether I could actually fulfill what I was agreeing to provide. The most daunting section dealt with production capacity and delivery schedules. Harrison and Associates expected their initial order to be fulfilled within 90 days of contract signing, with subsequent orders processed on a monthly basis. The quantities they were projecting would require me to produce more jewelry in 3 months than I'd created in the entire previous year. I sat back in my desk chair, staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, trying to wrap my mind around the logistics. My current setup could handle maybe 50 pieces per week working at maximum capacity. To meet their requirements, I'd need to increase production by at least 400%, while maintaining the quality standards that had attracted their interest in the first place. The financial projections were equally overwhelming. The contract included provisions for marketing co-op fees, shipping costs, and inventory insurance that would require upfront investments I hadn't fully anticipated. Even with their favorable payment terms, I'd need significant capital to ramp up operations before seeing any revenue from the partnership. For the first time since leaving Portland, I began to understand why my family had seemed so concerned. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was a complete transformation of everything Verde Luxe had been up to this point. Success would require not just scaling up existing operations, but fundamentally reimagining how the business functioned. I spent the rest of that week diving deep into research that made my initial preparation look superficial. Equipment suppliers, potential manufacturing partners, inventory management software, quality control systems, shipping logistics, insurance providers. Each solution I discovered revealed 3 new challenges I hadn't considered. The jewelry production equipment alone would cost more than I'd made in Verde Luxe's entire existence. Professional-grade casting equipment, polishing systems, quality control tools, packaging machinery. The estimates I collected from suppliers made my savings account look like pocket change. But the more I researched, the more I realized that other small jewelry businesses had faced similar scaling challenges and found ways to succeed. Online forums filled with entrepreneurs sharing strategies for managing rapid growth, case studies of partnerships between emerging designers and major retailers, step-by-step guides for transitioning from artisan production to commercial manufacturing. I discovered that several equipment suppliers offered financing programs specifically designed for small businesses entering retail partnerships. Manufacturing consultants who specialized in helping jewelry designers scale up operations. Even insurance companies that understood the unique risks of rapid business growth and offered policies designed to protect emerging brands. Slowly, the impossible began to feel merely difficult. Each problem I identified had potential solutions. Each challenge could be addressed with the right resources and planning. The question wasn't whether Verde Luxe could meet Harrison & Associates' requirements, but whether I had the courage to commit everything necessary to make it happen. That's when I decided to call Elena Rodriguez, a jewelry designer I'd connected with through Instagram, who'd successfully transitioned from individual sales to major retail partnerships 3 years earlier. Her brand, Luna Metals, was now carried in over 150 stores across the country, and she'd been generous with advice during my early days building Verde Luxe. Maya, I heard through the grapevine that you're talking to Harrison & Associates. That's incredible news. The fact that word was already circulating in the jewelry design community was both exciting and terrifying. Success in this industry apparently came with visibility that I wasn't sure I was ready for. It's amazing, but also completely overwhelming, I admitted. I'm looking at their contract and wondering if I'm crazy to think I can actually do this. Elena laughed, a warm sound that immediately made me feel less alone. I remember feeling exactly the same way when Bergdorf Goodman first approached Luna Metals. The gap between what you're doing now and what they're asking for feels impossible to bridge. But Maya, if they offered you this partnership, it's because they believe you can deliver. Jennifer Martinez doesn't waste time on designers who can't handle the pressure. How did you manage the scaling up? The production requirements alone seem impossible. One step at a time, and a lot of help from people who knew more than I did. The first thing I learned was that trying to do everything myself was a recipe for failure. You have to build a team, even if it starts small. Elena walked me through her own scaling process. From finding reliable manufacturing partners, to implementing quality control systems, to managing the financial pressures of rapid growth. Her story was filled with challenges that mirrored what I was facing, but also with solutions that proved these obstacles weren't insurmountable. The most important thing, she said, is to stay true to what made your brand special in the first place. Harrison & Associates didn't choose Verde Luxe because they wanted another generic jewelry line. They chose you because of your unique vision and quality. Don't lose that in the process of growing. After our conversation, I felt like I could see a path forward. Not an easy path, certainly, but a realistic one that other entrepreneurs had successfully navigated. I spent the next several days creating a detailed implementation plan that addressed every requirement in the Harrison & Associates contract. Manufacturing partners who could handle increased production while maintaining artisanal quality. Equipment financing that would spread upfront costs over manageable monthly payments. Inventory management systems that could track thousands of pieces across multiple retail locations. Quality control processes that would ensure every piece met Verde Luxe's standards, regardless of production volume. The plan was ambitious, complex, and would require me to operate at a level I'd never attempted before. But it was also achievable, based on real resources and proven strategies rather than wishful thinking. I was deep in spreadsheet calculations when my phone rang. Jake's name appeared on the screen, and I considered letting it go to voicemail. Our last conversation hadn't ended well, and I wasn't in the mood for another round of protective skepticism. "Hey Jake," I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Maya, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night, and I owe you an apology. Mom and Dad asked me to call you." The admission that this wasn't even his idea to reach out stung more than I'd expected. But I stayed quiet, waiting to see where he was going with this. We've all been doing some research on Harrison and Associates, and I have to admit, they do seem like a legitimate opportunity. Their track record with emerging designers is actually pretty impressive. I almost dropped the phone. After a week of dismissing every aspect of the partnership as unrealistic or exploitative, my family had apparently discovered that Harrison and Associates was exactly what I'd been telling them it was. "I appreciate that," I said carefully, not sure whether this was genuine acknowledgement or set up for some new form of concern. "But Maya, that makes us even more worried about whether you're ready for something this big. These aren't small-time players. If you commit to this and can't deliver, it could destroy your reputation in the industry permanently." And there it was. They'd moved from questioning the legitimacy of the opportunity to questioning my ability to handle it. The research that should have validated my excitement had instead amplified their fears about my competence. "Jake, I've spent the last week researching every aspect of scaling up production. I've talked to other designers who've made similar transitions. I've identified solutions for every challenge the contract presents. I'm not going into this blindly, but you've never done anything like this before. Maya, the production numbers they're talking about are massive. What if you invest everything in ramping up and then can't maintain quality? What if their customers don't respond the way they expect? What if there are problems you haven't thought of?" Each question felt like a small cut, death by 1,000 paper cuts of doubt. Yes, there were risks. Yes, there could be unforeseen problems. But there could also be tremendous success, industry recognition, financial independence, and the satisfaction of building something meaningful from scratch. "What if it works?" I asked. "What if Verde Luxe becomes everything I've been working toward? What if this partnership launches a career that makes me happier and more successful than I ever imagined possible?" The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Jake couldn't conceive of that scenario, couldn't imagine his sister succeeding at something this ambitious. The possibility that I might actually thrive in the jewelry industry wasn't part of his mental framework. "Maya, I just think you should be realistic about the odds. Most small businesses fail, especially when they try to grow too fast. Maybe you should consider negotiating for something smaller, just to test the waters." "The contract is the test," I explained, for what felt like the 100th time. This is how retail partnerships work. They start with manageable volumes to see if there's market demand. If Verde Luxe performs well, they'll expand the placement. If it doesn't, they'll phase it out gracefully. But what if you can't even handle the initial volumes? What if you sign this contract and then realize you're in over your head? The question revealed the fundamental difference between how Jake saw challenges and how I was learning to approach them. He saw obstacles as evidence that something shouldn't be attempted. I was beginning to see them as problems that needed creative solutions. "Then I'll figure it out," I said. "Jake, every successful entrepreneur has faced moments when they weren't sure they could deliver on their commitments. The difference between success and failure isn't the absence of challenges. It's the willingness to solve problems as they arise." "That sounds like wishful thinking, Maya. Business doesn't work on hope and determination alone. No, it works on preparation, planning, and execution, all of which I've been doing nonstop since I got back from Portland." I could hear him typing in the background, probably pulling up more research to support whatever point he was building toward. "I've been looking at the financials for small jewelry businesses that have attempted rapid scaling. The failure rate is really high, Maya. Over 60% of businesses that try to expand this quickly end up shutting down within 2 years. The statistic hit me like cold water, but I forced myself to think about what it actually meant. What about the 40% that succeed? What made them different from the ones that failed? I don't know. Probably luck, better funding, more experience. Or better preparation, stronger partnerships, and more commitment to making it work. Jake, I'm not some random person who stumbled into this opportunity. Jennifer Martinez chose Verde Luxe because she saw something valuable. Maybe instead of focusing on reasons I might fail, you could try to understand why she thinks I might succeed. The conversation went on for another 20 minutes, covering the same ground we'd been circling since I'd returned from Portland. Jake alternated between acknowledging that the opportunity was legitimate and insisting that I wasn't qualified to pursue it. By the time we hung up, I felt more drained than motivated. That evening, I called my mentor from college, Professor Williams, who'd taught the entrepreneurship course that had first sparked my interest in starting my own business. She'd built and sold 2 successful companies before transitioning to academia, and her perspective on business challenges had always been refreshingly practical. Maya, I remember when you first started talking about Verde Luxe in my class. You had a clarity of vision that impressed me then, and it sounds like you've stayed true to that vision while building real business skills. But Professor Williams, my family keeps pointing out all the ways this could go wrong. What if they're right? What if I'm being naive about the challenges? Tell me about your preparation process. How have you been approaching the scaling requirements? I walked her through everything I'd researched and planned over the past week. The manufacturing partnerships, equipment financing, quality control systems, inventory management strategies. By the time I finished explaining my implementation plan, I realized how comprehensive it actually was. Maya, that level of preparation suggests anything but naivete. You're approaching this like a serious entrepreneur who understands the challenges and has researched solutions. That's exactly how successful scaling works. But what about the risks? The statistics Jake mentioned about failure rates? Professor Williams was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear her choosing her words carefully. Every business decision involves risk, Maya. The question isn't whether there's risk. It's whether the potential rewards justify taking those risks. From what you've described, Harrison & Associates is offering you an opportunity to transform Verde Luxe from a side business into a legitimate career. Is that transformation worth the risk of failure? The question forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. What did I actually want from Verde Luxe? Was I content to keep it as a small, manageable hobby business that provided supplemental income and creative satisfaction? Or did I want to build something bigger, something that could support me financially while making a meaningful impact in the sustainability space? I want to build something that matters, I said finally. I want Verde Luxe to be a real business that influences how people think about fashion and environmental responsibility. I don't think I can do that staying small. Then you have your answer. The path to significance always involves risk. The entrepreneurs who succeed aren't the ones who avoid challenges. They're the ones who develop the skills and systems needed to overcome them. After our conversation, I felt like I could see the situation clearly for the first time since receiving the contract. My family's concerns weren't wrong, but they were incomplete. Yes, scaling Verde Luxe would be challenging and risky. But staying small was also risky, the risk of permanent mediocrity, of always wondering what might have been possible if I'd had the courage to try. I spent that weekend creating the most detailed business plan I'd ever developed. Financial projections that accounted for every scenario I could imagine. Production timelines that built in buffers for unexpected delays. Marketing strategies that leveraged Harrison & Associates. Support while maintaining Verde Luxe's unique brand identity. Risk mitigation plans for everything from supply chain disruptions to quality control failures. By Sunday evening, I had a 30-page document that addressed every concern my family had raised and several they hadn't thought of. More importantly, I had a clear vision of how Verde Luxe could successfully transition from artisan business to retail partner, while maintaining the values and quality that had attracted Harrison & Associates in the first place. Monday morning, I called Jennifer Martinez to discuss the contract terms and my implementation plan. The conversation lasted 2 hours and covered everything from production schedules to marketing campaigns to long-term growth strategies. Jennifer asked detailed questions about my scaling approach and seemed impressed by the thoroughness of my preparation. Maya, I have to say, your readiness to take this partnership seriously is exactly what we look for in emerging designers. A lot of artists struggle with the business side of scaling up, but you clearly understand what's required. I've had a lot of help from other designers who've made similar transitions. The jewelry community has been incredibly supportive. That's one of the things we love about this industry. There's a real spirit of collaboration that benefits everyone. Speaking of which, I'd like to introduce you to David Chen, our VP of Brand Development. He works specifically with emerging designers during their first year with us to ensure successful launches. The offer to connect me with additional support resources was encouraging, but it also highlighted how serious Harrison & Associates was about this partnership. They weren't just placing an order and hoping for the best. They were investing in Verde Luxe's success. That would be incredibly helpful. I want to make sure I exceed your expectations rather than just meeting them. Based on our conversation today, I have no doubt that you will. Maya, I've been doing this for 8 years, and I can usually tell within the first few months which partnerships are going to thrive. You have all the qualities we look for: clear vision, attention to quality, business acumen, and the drive to succeed at this level. After we hung up, I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by business plans and contract pages, feeling like a different person than the one who'd driven to Portland 2 weeks earlier. Not just because of the partnership opportunity, though that was transformative enough, but because I'd proven to myself that I could navigate complex business negotiations, develop comprehensive scaling strategies, and hold my own with industry professionals. The woman who'd spent years doubting her own competence had just spent 2 hours discussing advanced business strategies with one of the most respected buyers in retail. The entrepreneur my family still saw as naive and unprepared had developed implementation plans that impressed seasoned industry veterans. That evening, I made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. I was going to sign the Harrison & Associates contract, commit everything necessary to make Verde Luxe's retail partnership successful, and prove that their investment in my brand was the smartest decision they'd ever made. But first, I needed to have one final conversation with my family. Not to ask for their permission or seek their approval, but to inform them of my decision and give them one last chance to understand what I was building before it became too big for them to dismiss. The conversation would either bring us closer together or reveal just how fundamentally different our visions of success had become. Either way, Verde Luxe was about to get the chance it deserved, and I was about to discover what I was truly capable of when I stopped seeking validation and started trusting my own judgment. The next phase of my life was beginning, whether my family was ready to support it or not. 6 months later, I stood in the Harrison & Associates flagship store in downtown Seattle, watching customers examine Verde Luxe pieces under the warm gallery lighting. The earrings that had started as sketches in my childhood bedroom now hung on polished displays alongside established luxury brands, each piece tagged with cards explaining the environmental story behind the recycled materials. The transformation had been everything I'd planned for, and nothing I could have fully prepared for. Those first 90 days after signing the contract had tested every limit I thought I had. 18-hour workdays, supply chain emergencies, quality control crises that kept me awake at night, financial pressures that made my savings account look like a rounding error. But Verde Luxe had delivered every piece on schedule, and the customer response had exceeded even Jennifer's optimistic projections. "Maya, there's someone I'd like you to meet," Jennifer said, appearing beside me with a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit. "This is Marcus Thompson, CEO of Harrison & Associates." My heart jumped. I'd known Marcus would be at this launch event for Verde Luxe's expansion into their premium tier, but meeting the person who ultimately approved every major partnership decision still felt surreal. "Ms. Chen, I've been following Verde Luxe's performance very closely. What you've accomplished in 6 months is remarkable." His handshake was firm, his attention completely focused. "Jennifer tells me you're interested in expanding beyond jewelry into sustainable accessories? That's the long-term vision, yes. Handbags made from recycled ocean plastic, belts from upcycled materials, eventually a complete sustainable luxury line." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. We've been looking for a partner who could anchor our new sustainability initiative. Based on what I've seen from Verde Luxe, I think you might be exactly what we need. Would you be interested in discussing an exclusive partnership that would give you dedicated floor space in all 200 of our locations? The offer was so far beyond what I'd imagined when I first started Verde Luxe that I almost couldn't process it. An exclusive partnership meant guaranteed placement, marketing support, and revenue projections that would make Verde Luxe not just a successful business, but a major player in the sustainable fashion industry. I would be very interested in that conversation, I managed, trying to project the kind of confidence that had gotten me this far. Excellent. Jennifer will set up a meeting for next week. I think we're going to do some incredible things together, Maya. After Marcus moved on to greet other designers, I found myself alone for a moment, watching customers continue to gravitate toward the Verde Luxe display. A young woman was explaining to her friend how the ocean plastic in the necklace she was holding had been collected from beaches in Thailand. An older gentleman was examining the craftsmanship of a bracelet with the focused attention of someone who understood quality when he saw it. These weren't customers who'd stumbled across Verde Luxe by accident. They were people who'd specifically sought out sustainable luxury options, who valued the story behind the products as much as the aesthetics. The market I'd believed in from the beginning had proven to be larger and more enthusiastic than even my most optimistic projections. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena Rodriguez. Saw the feature about Verde Luxe in Fashion Weekly. You're officially a industry success story now. So proud of you. The Fashion Weekly article had been a complete surprise. A 3-page spread about emerging sustainable designers that featured Verde Luxe prominently. The journalist had interviewed Jennifer Martinez, who'd praised my business acumen and described the partnership as one of Harrison and Associates' most successful emerging designer launches. Seeing my work described in terms usually reserved for established luxury brands had been validating in ways I hadn't expected. But the real validation was happening right in front of me. Customers choosing Verde Luxe pieces not out of curiosity or novelty, but because they represented exactly what they'd been looking for. The sustainable luxury market wasn't a niche experiment. It was a fundamental shift in how people thought about fashion and environmental responsibility. The launch event was winding down when I noticed familiar figures near the store entrance. My parents and Jake, looking slightly overwhelmed by the upscale retail environment but clearly making an effort to be supportive. They'd driven up from Colorado specifically for this event, the first time they'd seen Verde Luxe in a retail setting. "Maya, this is incredible," my mother said, her voice carrying a note of wonder I hadn't heard before. I had no idea it would look so professional, so established. My father was examining one of the display cases with the focused attention he usually reserved for mechanical problems he was trying to solve. "The quality is really impressive, sweetheart. These look like they belong here." The comment might have sounded condescending from anyone else, but from my father it was pure amazement. He'd spent the last 6 months watching Verde Luxe's success from a distance, processing reports of monthly sales figures and retail expansion that challenged everything he'd believed about entrepreneurial risk. Jake was reading the environmental impact cards that accompanied each piece, his expression shifting from skepticism to genuine interest. "Maya, I didn't realize how comprehensive the sustainability angle was. This isn't just recycled materials, it's a complete supply chain strategy." "That was always the plan," I said. "Verde Luxe was never just about making jewelry. It was about proving that luxury and environmental responsibility could work together." "And you've definitely proved that," Jake admitted. "I owe you an apology. When you first told us about the Harrison and Associates opportunity, I thought you were getting in over your head. I was wrong." The admission meant more than I'd expected. Jake's skepticism had been the most painful because it came from genuine concern rather than dismissive condescension. Hearing him acknowledge that my judgment had been sound felt like closure on months of self-doubt. "I understand why you were worried," I said. "The scaling up was harder than I anticipated. There were definitely moments when I wondered if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. But you figured it out," my mother said, and for the first time in months her tone carried pride rather than protective concern. "You really built something amazing, Maya." Jennifer Martinez appeared with a bottle of champagne and glasses for everyone. "I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to toast the woman who's proven that sustainable luxury isn't just a trend, it's the future of retail. As we raised our glasses in the middle of the Harrison & Associates flagship store, surrounded by Verde Luxe pieces that had gone from bedroom sketches to luxury retail placement in less than 2 years, I felt like I was living in someone else's extraordinary life. To Verde Luxe, Jennifer said, and to Maya Chen, who had the vision to see what the industry needed before the industry knew it needed it. To taking risks that matter, I added, looking directly at my family as I spoke. The next morning, I woke up in my hotel room to find my phone flooded with notifications. The Fashion Weekly article had been picked up by several online publications, and Verde Luxe's social media accounts were exploding with new followers and customer inquiries. Orders from the Harrison & Associates website had tripled overnight, and Jennifer had already called to discuss accelerating the timeline for the exclusive partnership Marcus had mentioned. But the notification that meant the most was a simple text from my father. "Saw the article this morning. We're proud of you, Maya. You were right to trust your instincts." 3 weeks later, I was back in that same conference room in Portland, where everything had started. But this time the conversation was about Verde Luxe's exclusive partnership and expansion into a full sustainable accessories line. The production requirements would dwarf anything I'd managed so far, the financial commitments would require every skill I'd developed over the past year, and the timeline would test the limits of what I thought possible. "The sustainability market is exploding," Marcus Thompson was saying, "and we want Verde Luxe to be our flagship brand in that space. This partnership would make you our exclusive sustainable accessories partner for the next 5 years, with guaranteed placement in all locations and dedicated marketing support." The terms he outlined were extraordinary. Minimum order quantities that would generate more revenue in the first year than Verde Luxe had made in its entire existence. Marketing budgets that would put my brand in front of millions of customers. Expansion opportunities that could transform Verde Luxe from a jewelry company into a comprehensive lifestyle brand. "What kind of timeline are we looking at for the full-line launch?" I asked, my mind already racing through production logistics and supply chain management. "We'd like to see handbags and belts ready for our fall campaign, with expansion into footwear and outerwear the following year. It's ambitious, but based on what you've accomplished with Verde Luxe jewelry, we believe you can deliver." 6 months earlier, such a proposal would have seemed impossible. Now it felt like the natural next step in a journey that had already taught me I was capable of far more than I'd ever imagined. The entrepreneur who'd once questioned whether her bedroom jewelry business was legitimate was now being courted as the centerpiece of a major retailer's sustainability strategy. "I'm ready to make that commitment," I said, and meant every word. As I signed the partnership agreement that would transform Verde Luxe from a successful jewelry line into a major sustainable luxury brand, I thought about that Sunday morning when my family had dismissed my business as pathetic. When I'd sat at our kitchen table, feeling like my dreams were too big for my reality. The woman who'd signed that first Harrison & Associates contract 6 months earlier had been determined but uncertain, confident in her vision but unsure of her ability to execute it. The woman signing this exclusive partnership agreement knew exactly what she was capable of and had the track record to prove it. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Saw the news about your exclusive partnership on LinkedIn. Dad keeps showing the article to everyone at the hardware store. Pretty sure the whole town knows his daughter is a successful entrepreneur now." The image of my practical, cautious father bragging about my business success to his customers made me smile. The man who'd once worried that I was gambling my future on unrealistic dreams was now proudly telling anyone who'd listen about his daughter, the luxury brand founder. That evening, I called my parents from my hotel room to share the details of the exclusive partnership. The conversation was warm, enthusiastic, filled with the kind of support I'd craved during those early days of building Verde Luxe. "We always knew you were special, Maya," my mother said. "We just wanted to protect you from disappointment. But you've shown us that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all." "You were right to push forward when we were holding you back," my father added. "I'm learning that experience isn't always the best teacher. Sometimes vision and determination matter more than playing it safe." 2 years later, Verde Luxe sustainable accessories are carried in over 300 stores across North America. The brand has expanded into Europe and Asia, won multiple industry awards for environmental innovation, and generated revenue that's transformed my life in ways I never could have anticipated. But the success that matters most isn't measured in sales figures or retail partnerships. It's the knowledge that I trusted my own judgment over other people's fears, that I chose possibility over security, that I proved to myself and everyone who doubted me that dreams backed by determination and hard work aren't just fantasies, they're blueprints for extraordinary lives. The family that once called my business pathetic now introduces me as their entrepreneur daughter who built a luxury brand from scratch. The woman who once questioned her own competence now mentors other emerging designers through the scaling challenges that once seemed insurmountable. Verde Luxe taught me that the only opinion that truly matters about your potential is your own. Everyone else is just guessing based on their own limitations rather than your possibilities. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.